The night was bright in New York City. Cars moved fast. Lights shone from tall glass buildings and inside one of the most expensive restaurants. Rich people were laughing, drinking, and closing big deals. At a corner table sat Richard Hale, a millionaire CEO. Everyone in the city knew his name. He owned a famous tech company, wore shiny watches, and talked about success as if he created it himself. That night, he was meeting 3 big investors for dinner. The deal on the table was worth more than $200 million. If everything went right, his company would double its value by morning. Richard looked around proudly. "This is my place," he told one of his partners. "Every waiter here knows who I am," he smiled, showing his perfect white teeth. A young waitress named Amara walked to their table. She was polite, calm, and had a kind smile. She greeted them softly. "Good evening, gentlemen. What would you like to drink?" Her voice was gentle, her uniform perfectly clean. But Richard didn't even look at her face. He kept speaking on his phone, talking about profits, power, and success. Amara stood quietly, waiting for him to finish. Finally, one of the investors said, "Richard, let's order first." "Ah!" Richard nodded quickly. "Fine. Bring us the best wine and make it fast," he said without looking at her. Amara wrote down the order and walked away. She was used to rude customers, but something about Richard's tone hurt. Still, she kept her smile. "It's just another night," she told herself. When she came back with the wine, the restaurant's lights dimmed slightly, and soft jazz played in the background. She carefully poured wine into their glasses. But suddenly, the bottle slipped a little, and a few drops of wine spilled on the white tablecloth. Before she could even say sorry, Richard snapped. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. Amara froze. Her hands shook. I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. Richard slammed his napkin on the table. "Sorry, you can't even pour a drink right. Are you stupid or something?" The whole restaurant went silent. Even the music seemed to stop. All eyes turned to them. Amara's eyes watered, but she stayed calm. She softly said, "I'm very sorry, sir. I'll clean this right away." She picked up a towel and cleaned the spot, her hands trembling. Richard leaned back in his chair and laughed to his friends. This is what happens when they hire cheap labor. No brains, no class. One of his partners looked uncomfortable. Another one whispered, "Richard, calm down. It was just an accident." But Richard waved his hand proudly. No. People like her never learn unless you show them their place. At a nearby table, an old man sat quietly, watching everything. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. He wore a simple suit, no gold watch, no fancy rings, yet there was something powerful about him. He didn't say a word. He just observed. Amara finished cleaning and gave a small nod. "Thank you for your patience, sir," she said, and walked away slowly. Behind the counter, she took a deep breath and tried to smile again for her next table. Richard continued laughing, completely unaware that the old man's eyes never left him. Minutes passed. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had changed. People whispered. The investors looked uneasy. One of them said quietly, "Richard, maybe we should call it a night." But Richard didn't care. "Relax," he said. "Tomorrow we'll sign the biggest deal of our lives. Nothing can stop that." The old man paid his bill, stood up, and walked past Richard's table. As he passed, he looked directly at Richard for a second, a calm, unreadable stare, and then left without saying a word. Richard didn't notice. He just raised his glass and laughed again. But if he had seen that look, if he had known who that old man really was, his smile would have faded. Because that man was about to change Richard's life for ***. The next morning, New York City woke up to bright sunlight. Expensive cars rolled down the streets, and office towers glowed like silver mirrors. Inside one of those tall buildings sat Mr. Thompson, the quiet old man from the restaurant. He was not just an ordinary man. He was the chairman of Thompson Industries, one of the biggest investment firms in America. The same company Richard Hale wanted a $200 million partnership with. Last night, Mr. Thompson had gone to the restaurant simply to enjoy dinner alone. He never expected to witness such cruelty. He remembered every word that Richard said. The way the young waitress had stayed calm after being insulted touched his heart. In that short moment, Mr. Thompson saw the difference between true class and false pride. He sat at his desk quietly, holding his coffee cup. His secretary entered the room and said, "Sir, Mr. Richard Hale has confirmed the meeting for 10 a.m. He seems very confident about the deal." Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. "Confidence is good," he said, "but only when it comes with respect." He leaned back in his chair and looked out the window. His thoughts went back to that moment when Amara said, "Thank you for your patience, sir," even after being called stupid. He had seen many rich men in his life, but that girl had something rare-grace. Mr. Thompson decided he needed to know more. He called the restaurant. "Good morning," he said softly. "I came in last night. There was a waitress, a young black woman, Amara, I believe. Can you tell her I appreciated her professionalism?" The manager sounded surprised. "Of course, sir. She'll be very happy to hear that." After ending the call, Mr. Thompson smiled slightly. Sometimes, he murmured, the richest hearts wear the simplest uniforms. At the same time, across town, Richard Hale was getting ready for the big meeting. He wore his most expensive suit, fixed his tie, and looked at himself in the mirror. "Today I become unstoppable," he told himself. He didn't remember Amara's face, nor did he care about what had happened the night before. To him, she was just another forgettable worker. He walked into the meeting room at Thompson Industries like a king entering his palace. His business partners followed him, carrying files and laptops. Richard's loud voice filled the room. "Gentlemen, this deal will be the biggest win of the year," he said proudly. Then the door opened. Mr. Thompson walked in, calm and collected, holding a folder. Everyone stood to greet him. Richard gave a big smile. "Mr. Thompson? Great to finally meet you again," he said, pretending to be friendly. But Mr. Thompson's expression didn't change. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," he replied quietly. His voice was polite, but there was no warmth. They all sat down. Mr. Thompson started the meeting with simple questions about Richard's company profits. "Growth, market share," Richard answered confidently, speaking like a man who already owned the deal. After a few minutes, Mr. Thompson asked, "Tell me, Mr. Hale, what do you think makes a leader truly great?" Richard smiled. "Results," he said quickly. "A great leader is someone who gets things done no matter how. People must respect you, even fear you if you want to win." Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Fear?" he repeated softly. "Do you believe respect and fear are the same?" Richard laughed. "Of course not, but sometimes you must remind people who's in charge." There was a long pause. The air in the room felt heavy. Mr. Thompson looked straight into Richard's eyes. "And how do you treat people who can't give you anything in return?" he asked. For a second, Richard froze. It was such a strange question. He forced a smile. "Well, everyone deserves respect, I guess." His voice sounded unsure. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. "I see," he said. Then he closed the folder in front of him. "That will be all for today." Richard looked confused. "That's it? No contract signing?" Mr. Thompson stood up. "Not yet. There's something I need to think about." As he left the room, he turned once more toward Richard and said quietly, "Sometimes, Mr. Hale, a small act reveals a man's true worth." The door closed behind him, leaving Richard sitting in silence. For the first time in years, the confident millionaire felt uneasy. He didn't know that Mr. Thompson had seen everything. He didn't know that the test had already begun, and he had no idea that tomorrow his empire would start to fall. Ramesh sat in the small interrogation room. The walls were plain gray, and a single fan made a soft humming sound. He looked tired, like a man who had been carrying a heavy secret for years. Inspector Rajveer Singh sat across from him, watching quietly. The recorder on the table blinked red. "Tell me everything," Rajveer said. Ramesh took a deep breath. His eyes were full of guilt. It was a normal evening. At first, he began. Anjali had cooked dinner, but she was angry. She said she wanted to leave me. Rajveer leaned forward. "Why? What was the reason?" Ramesh hesitated. "Money. And another man." She had started talking to someone on her phone. I found messages. I confronted her that night. The inspector nodded slightly. Go on, Ramesh continued. We fought. She shouted that she was tired of this life, tired of me. I lost control. I pushed her. She hit her head on the table corner and fell. I tried to wake her up, but she didn't move. I didn't mean to kill her, sir. It just happened in anger. Rajveer's face didn't change. He had heard similar stories before, but something about Ramesh's version felt too clean, too controlled. What did you do next? He asked. Ramesh's hands trembled. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but then I thought they would never believe me. I wrapped her body in a sheet. I waited for hours, sitting beside her. When the sun started to rise, I remembered the water tank on the roof. It was big, and no one ever checked it. I climbed up using a ladder and put her inside. His voice cracked. I didn't want anyone to find her. The room went silent. The officers standing near the door looked at each other in shock. Rajveer crossed his arms. And you lived here for 3 years? Pretending nothing happened? Ramesh lowered his head. Yes, every day I woke up hoping no one would find out. Every sound made me jump. Every knock on the door scared me. I couldn't sleep at night. I could almost hear her voice sometimes. Inspector's tone turned sharp. That's not guilt, Ramesh. That's fear. Meanwhile, the investigation team searched deeper. They checked Anjali's phone records and found messages from an unknown number. The messages stopped exactly 1 day before she died. The man's name was Vikram, someone who used to work at Ramesh's garage years ago. When Rajveer asked about him, Ramesh looked surprised. Vikram? I didn't know he was still around. Inspector decided to find him. Within 2 days, Vikram was brought in. He looked nervous, but calm. He admitted he was close to Anjali, but claimed he had nothing to do with her death. She told me she was scared of Ramesh, Vikram said. She planned to leave him that night. Now, there were 2 stories. One from the husband, one from the alleged lover. Rajveer knew someone was lying. He decided to test Ramesh's confession. The forensic team examined the wound marks on Anjali's skull. The report came back the hit on her head was not from the table edge. It was from a metal object, possibly a wrench. When Rajveer showed the report to Ramesh, his expression changed. No, sir. That can't be true, he said, panicking. I didn't use anything. I just pushed her. Rajveer's eyes were cold. Then how did her skull fracture like this? Ramesh had no answer. He started sweating, his voice breaking. Maybe she fell again. I don't know. The inspector stood up. You lied, Ramesh. You didn't just lose your temper, you killed her. And then you hid her body where no one could find it. Tears rolled down Ramesh's face. I didn't mean to. I swear I didn't mean to. Rajveer looked at him one last time. You'll get your chance to explain that in court. Outside, the town was buzzing with gossip and fear. Everyone thought the case was finally solved. But Rajveer wasn't satisfied. Something still didn't fit. Something small, but important. The inspector looked at the forensic photos again and whispered to himself, if he killed her, why was her phone found 2 kilometers away? A new question, a new twist, and a secret still waiting to be revealed. Inspector Rajveer Singh sat alone in his office late at night. Files were scattered across the desk, coffee gone cold. The sound of rain tapped softly against the window. He stared at the photo of Anjali's phone, found near a deserted park 2 kilometers from her house, a place Ramesh had never mentioned. How did it get there? He whispered. He replayed the crime in his head again and again. If Ramesh had killed Anjali inside the house and hidden her in the tank, how did her phone end up far away? Something didn't match. Rajveer decided to check the forensic data from the phone. Though old, a few deleted messages were recovered. One stood out, a text sent the same night Anjali disappeared. I'm leaving tonight. You won't stop me this time. It was sent at 11:58 p.m. The message was directed to a contact named V, which likely stood for Vikram, but something strange followed. The next message, sent from Vikram's phone at 12:10 a.m., said, "Come to the park. I'll wait there." That meant Anjali actually left the house alive after the fight with Ramesh. Rajveer immediately called his team. Rechecked the neighbors' statements. Did anyone see her after midnight that night? By morning, one new clue surfaced. A man who owned a small tea stall near the road said, "I saw a woman that night. It was raining. She was crying and waiting near the bus stop. A man on a bike came and talked to her. Could you recognize the man?" Rajveer asked. The vendor nodded slowly. Yes, I think it was Vikram. The entire direction of the case shifted. Rajveer called Vikram back for another interrogation. This time, his tone was cold and direct. "You said you never saw her that night, but witnesses say otherwise. You met her at the bus stop." Vikram looked nervous. "No, sir, I didn't, I swear." Rajveer dropped a photo on the table, CCTV footage from a nearby petrol station. It clearly showed Vikram's bike passing by the area. Around 12:20 a.m., Vikram's hand started shaking. "Okay, I met her, yes. But she was alive when I left her. I dropped her near her house. She said she wanted to talk to Ramesh one last time. That's the truth. Why didn't you say this earlier?" Rajveer demanded. "Because I was scared. Everyone would blame me." Vikram shouted. Now the puzzle was even more confusing. If Anjali left with Vikram and came back home, then what really happened inside the house? Rajveer ordered a new forensic test, this time focusing on time of death. The result shocked everyone. Anjali didn't die at midnight. She died around 2 a.m. 2 hours later. That meant she was alive even after meeting Vikram. Rajveer returned to the house once more, walking slowly through each room. He looked at the kitchen table, the broken photo frame, the water tank above all silent witnesses. Then his eyes caught something new, a small, rusted wrench. Lying behind the water pump, it matched the shape of the wound on Anjali's skull. He called Ramesh back. "We found the weapon." Ramesh's face turned white. "I told you it was an accident." Rajveer cut him off. "No, you said you pushed her. But this tool proves otherwise. You hit her twice." Ramesh broke down crying. "I only wanted to stop her from leaving. She said she was running away with Vikram. I got angry. I lost control." The confession was complete. But Rajveer's instincts still whispered something wasn't right. When the forensic team rechecked the phone, they found fingerprints, not only Anjali's or Vikram's. There was a third person's partial print. Someone unknown. Rajveer frowned. A third person? Who else was there that night? The case, which seemed almost solved, opened again like a dark wound. Outside, thunder rolled. The rain returned just like the night Anjali vanished. Rajveer looked at the photo of Anjali once more and said quietly, "This story isn't finished yet." The next morning, the city that once admired Richard Hale now whispered his name with pity and disgust. News headlines screamed from every screen. Millionaire CEO loses $200 million. Deal after insulting waitress. Reporters surrounded his company's main office. Cameras flashed nonstop. Every step Richard took was followed by a dozen lenses trying to capture his face. For years, he loved attention. But now, it felt like fire burning his skin. Inside his office, chaos had replaced control. Phones rang endlessly. His assistant, pale and shaking, said, "Sir, the investors are pulling out. They say they can't risk being linked to bad publicity." Richard slammed his hand on the desk. Bad publicity. This is ridiculous. One mistake doesn't erase everything I've built. But even he knew the truth. This was not one mistake. This was who he had been all along. The world was just finally seeing it. By afternoon, his company's board members gathered for an emergency meeting. Richard walked in, expecting support. Instead, he found cold faces and folded arms. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, we've received serious complaints about your behavior, not just yesterday, but over the past few years." Richard's jaw tightened. "So now, you believe gossip?" "It's not gossip," another board member replied. "Your employees recorded how you yelled at them, how you humiliated staff. The videos are online." Richard's heart sank. "Videos?" "Yes," the chairman said firmly. It's all over social media. You've become a symbol of arrogance and cruelty." For the first time, Richard had no words. He tried to speak, but all that came out was silence. The chairman continued, "We have no choice but to remove you as CEO, effective immediately." The room went quiet. Richard looked around. These were the same people who once praised him, laughed at his jokes, and called him a genius. Now, not one of them met his eyes. Outside, reporters waited again. "Mr. Hale, is it true you've been fired? Do you have anything to say to the waitress you insulted? Do you regret your actions?" Richard pushed through them without a word. Cameras flashed. His luxury car door slammed shut. He drove fast through the streets, past the same restaurant where it all began. He slowed down, staring through the window. The lights inside were warm. People were laughing, eating, smiling. Life went on without him. For a brief moment, he thought about going inside, maybe to apologize, but pride stopped him. Pride, the same monster that had built his empire, now chained him to his downfall. He pressed the accelerator and disappeared into the night. Days turned into weeks. Hall Technologies collapsed piece by piece. Investors backed out. Clients canceled contracts. Employees found new jobs. The company that once shone like gold now stood empty, its building dark and quiet. Richard's personal life fell apart too. His mansion was silent. His friends stopped calling. His phone, once filled with business contacts and party invitations, now stayed cold on the table. He tried to reach out to people he once called partners, but none replied. Everyone had moved on. One night he stood on his balcony, looking at the city lights. His reflection in the glass looked older, weaker, broken. "How did I end up here?" he whispered. His mind went back to the restaurant, to the waitress's calm face, to her quiet eyes. The more he thought about her, the more he realized she had something he never did: peace. He closed his eyes, remembering her words, "Thank you for your patience." Sir, even in insult she had stayed kind, and he, in all his power, had failed to be human. Meanwhile, Amara's life quietly changed. People came to the restaurant just to meet her. They called her the girl who stayed strong. She didn't seek fame, but her story inspired thousands, and far away. In a cold, dark apartment, Richard Hale finally understood the truth. Money can buy comfort, not respect. Power can demand silence, not loyalty. And arrogance can destroy everything in one night. He looked at the city one last time and whispered, "I had everything except kindness." Weeks passed, and the storm around Richard Hale slowly faded from the headlines. The world moved on, but he couldn't. His once busy mansion now stood silent, the air heavy with regret. The walls that once echoed with parties and laughter now whispered only memories. Each morning, he sat at his dining table, drinking black coffee and staring at nothing. His phone, once filled with constant messages and business calls, stayed quiet. It had been days since anyone had reached out. The silence felt louder than any noise he had ever heard. One day Richard decided to step out. He wore simple clothes, no shiny suit, no gold watch. As he walked through the streets of New York, people still recognized him. But their eyes no longer carried respect, only curiosity and pity. He stopped outside the same restaurant where everything had gone wrong. Through the glass, he saw new customers, waiters moving gracefully, laughter filling the air. His chest tightened. For a long moment, he just stood there, watching. Then, with a deep breath, he pushed the door open. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee and roasted food filled the air. The manager noticed him and stiffened, unsure of what to say. Richard gave a weak smile. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to apologize." The manager nodded and called someone from the back. Moments later, Amara walked out, carrying a tray. She stopped when she saw him. For a few seconds, silence filled the room. Richard stood slowly. "Amara," he said, his voice quieter than ever. "You probably don't want to see me, and I don't blame you. But I came here to say sorry. Truly sorry." Amara looked at him, calm as always. "You don't need to apologize to me, sir. she said softly. I moved on. I wish I could, Richard replied. I've lost everything. My company, my name, my respect. But the thing that hurts the most is knowing I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Her eyes softened. Sometimes, she said gently, life teaches us lessons in hard ways. I hope you learn yours. Richard nodded. I already have, he said. Respect is not given by money, it's earned by kindness. For the first time in a long while, he meant every word. As Richard turned to leave, a familiar voice came from behind. Mr. Hale? It was Mr. Thompson. He had entered the restaurant quietly and was standing near the doorway. Everyone froze. Richard's heart dropped. Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson raised his hand. No need for excuses. I didn't come here for business. He looked at Amara and smiled. I came to speak with her. Amara looked surprised. Me? Yes, he said kindly. Your calmness that night showed real strength. People like you are rare. I'd like you to work for me as a public relations advisor for my foundation. We support young people who face unfair treatment. Amara's eyes widened. Me, but I'm just a waitress. Mr. Thompson smiled. No, Amara. You are someone with dignity, grace, and heart. That's what my foundation needs. Tears filled her eyes. Thank you, sir. I'll do my best. Richard stood quietly, watching the moment unfold. For the first time, he didn't feel jealous or angry. He felt something new. Peace, mixed with pain. He realized this was justice, not revenge. Months later, Amara began her new job. She worked hard, helping others, spreading kindness wherever she went. People admired her story, not because she was a victim, but because she never let anger win. One evening, after a long day at the foundation, Amara opened a small cafe of her own, something she had dreamed of since childhood. She named it Grace and Grounds. Its motto was written on the wall in simple words. Respect costs nothing but means everything. Far away. Richard Hale lived quietly now, teaching business ethics to young entrepreneurs at a small community college. He never spoke about his fall, but his students often said, he teaches like a man who has lived every word he says. Sometimes after class, Richard would pass by Amara's cafe. He never went in, but he smiled from afar, proud of the person she had become, and thankful for the lesson she had given him, because in the end, he finally understood, kindness is the strongest currency of all.